In this lecture, you'll learn about migrating 7 mode to Clustered ONTAP and the different tools that you can use to help with that, including the 7 mode transition tool. As you learned at the start of the course, back in ONTAP 8.2, you could get that as either 7 mode or clustered mode. But since ONTAP 8.3, ONTAP has only been available as the clustered version. Now, there are still actually quite a few deployments of 7 mode still out there in the real world, but NetApp have been recommending for a long time that customers should migrate those 7 mode systems to Clustered ONTAP. Obviously, all the new features as they're becoming available are only available on clustered mode, and ONTAP 8.2 and earlier versions are really from a long time ago. So if you are still using 7 mode, it is recommended to upgrade that to Clustered ONTAP. Now, a few different tools are available that can simplify this process. You can use the 7MTT, that's the 7 mode transition tool, and with that you can either do a copy-free transition or a copy-based transition. I'll explain the difference between those two options as we go through this lecture. Another option is to use third-party tools, and I'll talk about those right now. So depending on the workloads that you're using with your 7 mode storage system, host and or application migration options may be available. For example, you can use VMware Storage vMotion to move your VMware data stores from the 7 mode system to a clustered ONTAP system. Other options are Hyper-V Storage Live Migration, which is basically the Microsoft Hyper-V version of Storage vMotion. Also Oracle Automatic Storage Management Migration and Microsoft Exchange Database Availability Group Replication. So obviously all of these methods are specific to the particular workload that you're moving. For example, VMware Storage vMotion only works with VMware. The Exchange Database Availability Group Replication only works with Microsoft Exchange. Now, using a host or application-based migration is often the preferred option where available, as it will typically be the least disruptive. Most of these enterprise class applications do support moving the storage from one system to another one and doing that non-disruptively to clients. And obviously when the application can do that itself up at the application level and it's the least disruptive way of doing it, that makes this a really good option to use. Any storage related settings configured within the application will be retained. For example, if that application is clustered across multiple LUNs and that is handled at the application level for the fault tolerance, then those settings are going to be easily maintained as you move from your 7 mode to your clustered system if you do an application level migration. If multiple workloads are in use, separate tools will be required. If I just go back a slide here, you'll see that if, for example, on your 7 mode system, you've got Exchange running on there, and maybe you have also got CIFS home directories on there as well. Well, obviously you can't use the Microsoft Exchange migration tool to migrate your home directories as well. So if you've got multiple workloads and you are using application-based migration, then you're going to have to use a different tool for each of those different workloads. So that can make this a bit more of an involved option to do the migration. Also, NetApp settings will not be migrated and need to be configured separately. These application level migration tools are not aware of the underlying NetApp settings, so you're going to have to configure those as well on top. For example, your snapshot copies. With snapshots, they are not going to be replicated to the clustered system. So what to do is, on that clustered system, after you've done the migration, set up snapshots in the same way that they were configured on the 7 mode system. So use the same kind of snapshot policy there, retain the same amount of snapshots as well. Wait for a full iteration of those snapshots to be taken on the clustered system before you go and remove them from the 7 mode system, just in case you do need to back up from snapshots later. Also, you're going to want to configure your storage efficiency and snap mirror settings as well, again, to match what was existing in the 7-mode system. Now, you should consider using the 7-mode transition tool if non-disruptive migration is not possible. Meaning that if non-disruptive migration is possible, often you're going to want to use these application level tools because it's going to have the least impact to your production environment and to your users. But if it's not possible to do it in a non-disruptive way at the application level, if it's going to be disruptive anyway, then often you're going to want to use the 7-mode transition tool in that case, because the 7-mode transition tool can be easier, more simple to implement, and also it's going to carry across all of your NetApp settings. If you are doing an application-based transition, NetApp have got some documentation that can help with this. That is the technical report number 4336, which is Enterprise Application Transition to Clustered Data ONTAP. That gives you details on how to do this for Oracle, for Microsoft Exchange, SQL Server, and SharePoint Server, for VMware vSphere and VMware View, and for Microsoft Hyper-V. So in that document, it covers each of those applications and it says what the tools are available to migrate those particular applications. So let's look at an example that's actually from that document, and this is for migrating Oracle if you're using SAN for it. So the first thing to do is on the Clustered ONTAP system, prepare that with your SVMs and your volumes, because you're going to need volumes available there to migrate the data over to. Next up, provision LUNs in the Clustered ONTAP storage with the same size as the existing 7-mode LUNs that you're going to be moving over. Then prepare the Clustered ONTAP LUNs as ASM disks in Oracle. So make those LUNs on the clustered system available to your Oracle system so that they can be initialized there. Then add the new ASM disks to the respective ASM disk groups by using Oracle Enterprise Manager or through the command line. So once you've got those LUNs set up on the Clustered ONTAP system and you've connected to them from the Oracle system, use the tools in the Oracle system to get those LUNs ready to add it to the ASM configuration. Then after the rebalance is complete, so after you've moved all of the data from the 7-mode system to the Clustered ONTAP system within Oracle, you can then remove the 7-mode ASM disks from the disk group and you're done. And all the other different applications as well, it's going to be quite similar to that. So you're going to prepare the Clustered ONTAP system where it's very similar with the volumes that you've got on the 7-mode system. Then you're going to use the application itself to connect to the new clustered system and migrate the data over. And then you can decommission the 7-mode system. Okay, so that was using host or application level tools. Our next option is using the 7-mode transition tool. And with this, you can either use the copy-free or the copy-based migration that we'll talk about in a second. So the 7-mode transition tool is software that you download from the NetApp website and you then install it on a Windows or a Linux host. It copies or moves data from the 7-mode to the clustered system, and it also migrates the NetApp settings such as your snapshot settings, etc., and also the metadata as well. So you can't just plug in directly the data from a 7-mode system to a cluster mode system because some of the settings under there are different under the hood. So when you do migrate the data from 7-mode to cluster mode using the 7-mode transition tool, it is going to convert all of those settings for you. And it also provides a wizard, which makes it very easy. It walks you through the migration steps. The destination clustered system can be a new system. So if you have decided that you want to migrate your 7-mode system, maybe the hardware is coming up for a hardware refresh, and you want to have it on the new Clustered ONTAP as well, well, in that case, you could buy a new system specifically for this migration. Or maybe you already had a Clustered ONTAP system in place, which is serving data to other clients. That's fine too. You can still migrate the 7-mode system's data onto that Clustered ONTAP system. Obviously, if you're doing that, you need to make sure that there's headroom there and it's not going to negatively impact the performance. The clustered ONTAP, as you know, is very scalable. So if you need to, you could add additional hardware there to get it ready for the additional workload that's coming from the 7-mode system. With the 7-mode transition tool, all of the SAN and NAS protocols are supported. So it doesn't matter what workloads you are running on the 7-mode system, you're going to be able to migrate them to Clustered ONTAP using the 7MTT. And as we said earlier, the tool runs either copy-based transition, which is known as CBT, or the copy-free transition. Coming up in the next slides, I'll explain the differences between them and also the considerations about which one you would use. If you install the 7-mode transition tool on Linux rather than Windows, it only supports the CBT method. So normally you're going to be running this on a Windows host. Okay, so our first option with 7MTT is copy-based transition. The 7-mode transition tool has actually gone through a few different versions, a few different iterations, with additional features and extra simplicity added each time. The first version of 7MTT that was available before the copy-free transition was copy-based transition. This gives you granular control by replicating data from 7-mode to the clustered ONTAP system at the volume level. So if on your 7-mode system you've got some legacy data on there that you don't actually need anymore, that you don't need to migrate, well, you don't have to migrate those volumes. So you can pick and choose the volumes that you're going to migrate. It uses TDP, that's Transition Data Protection type SnapMirror, to perform a baseline transfer and continues with incremental updates until you are ready to complete the migration. So, you know, when we were talking about SnapMirror earlier, I would have said there that it's not possible to do SnapMirror replication between clustered and 7-mode systems. This is actually an exception to that rule. When you use the 7-mode transition tool, it does use SnapMirror to replicate data from the 7-mode system to the clustered ONTAP system for that migration. NetApp features such as SnapMirror relationships, snapshots, and storage efficiency are retained. Because this is the NetApp tool that you're using for the migration, all of your NetApp level settings are going to be migrated across as well. That is true for both the copy-based and also the copy-free transition. And it can be used on its own or in conjunction with third-party tools when multiple workloads are in use. So, for example, if you do have a 7-mode system and you are running Microsoft Exchange and also you've got your users' CIFS home directories on there as well, you could use the Exchange tool to migrate the Exchange data, and then you could use 7-mode transition tool, copy-based transition, to migrate the home directories across. So let's have a look and see how 7MTT copy-based transition works. So we start off, we have got our 7-mode HA pair here. So we've got our existing 7-mode system. Then we get our host, either Windows or Linux, and we're going to install the 7-mode transition tool software on there. Then we get our cluster mode system, either a new one, which is going to be used for this, or it could be an existing system running other workloads. And right now, our disk shell, our data is on the 7-mode system, and we're going to migrate everything over to the clustered ONTAP system. So we use copy-based transition. So we use the 7-mode transition tool running on our host, and it is going to help us with the migration. So we're going to have IP connectivity between the 7-mode and the clustered ONTAP system, and we're going to use SnapMirror to migrate the data, make a copy of it from the 7-mode system to the clustered ONTAP system. So when we've done that, we're going to have a copy of the data in both locations. Because we're using the 7-mode transition tool, it is going to convert all the settings that are necessary so that this is going to work on the clustered ONTAP system. So before the migration, our clients are going to be connecting into and using the 7-mode system. After the migration, we're going to do a cutover, and our clients are then going to access their data through the clustered ONTAP system. So looking at the operations here, the order of operations. So we start off with planning and pre-checks. That includes doing stuff like checking the service processor on your systems has got an IP address, checking that secure shell is enabled. So most of those settings will be enabled by default anyway. Then after that, using the 7-mode transition tool, we're going to do the baseline transfer. So it's going to do the initial snap mirror replication from the 7-mode to the clustered ONTAP system. Then in the meantime, until we're actually ready to do the cutover, any new data that is written to the 7-mode system is going to be replicated to the clustered ONTAP system with incremental updates. Then when we're just about ready to do the cutover, we'll do the pre-cutover and test mode. Then so not all of our hosts are going to be using the new system now, but from a test host, we will use that to connect to the clustered ONTAP system, verify that it can access it and everything is working okay. We can then disconnect all of our production clients, do the final storage cutover. So the final replication is going to happen at this point here. We can then so that's why we've disconnected the clients to make sure that there's no more data being written to the 7-mode system. Then the clustered ONTAP system is ready, so we can reconnect the clients there and then just verify everything is working okay, and we're done with the migration. With the first step here, so I'll just go back a slide again. So part of the planning and pre-checks is collect and assess. So this is actually part of the 7-mode transition tool. It's about the first thing that you're going to do in there. So the 7-mode transition tool, it's got this collect and assess functionality, which audits your 7-mode system, also fiber channel switches if you're using fiber channel, and also your hosts. And it helps identify any potential issues with the migration. So you can catch that early on and you can rectify those issues before you proceed with the migration. It uses the inventory collect tool. So it's another piece of software, but it's integrated and installed with the 7-mode transition tool. You can also run it separately if you wanted to as well. So the inventory collect tool collects info from your 7-mode storage system, also Microsoft Windows, Red Hat Linux Enterprise, and VMware ESXi, so Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and also from your Cisco and Brocade fiber channel switches if you're using fiber channel. Now, obviously, for those systems to give up information, you need to provide credentials, the username and password in the 7-mode transition tool for it to log into those systems. So when you go through the collect and assess step, you point it at the systems that you want it to audit. So you enter their host names or their IP addresses there, and also the login credentials. It will then go out and connect to the systems, gather this information, looking for any potential issues that could affect the migration. And here's just a screenshot of that. So you can see when you do run the 7-mode transition tool, this is the first part that you'll run there, is collect and assess. In here, enter the systems that you want to audit and their login details. Once you've done that, you can then carry on through the rest of the 7-mode transition tool wizard. It will guide you through the entire process. So just going back to the process again, as you saw there. So all of this process, you're going to be guided through it as you go through the 7-mode transition tool wizard. And there's another screenshot there of how that wizard is going to help you out and make the whole process very simple. Okay, so that was the copy-based transition. The other way that we can run the 7-mode transition tool is the copy-free transition. With copy-free transition, the disk shelves that are in use on the 7-mode system are going to be moved over to the clustered ONTAP system. So basically what you do is you disconnect the cables from the 7-mode system and plug them into the clustered ONTAP system instead. So you're physically moving the disk shelves from 7-mode over to cluster mode. With the copy-free transition, the migration is at the controller HA pair level. So with copy-based transition, it was at the volume level. It's more granular. With copy-free, it's at the entire controller HA pair level. Again, the same as it was with the copy-based transition, your NetApp features such as snap mirror relationships, snapshots, and storage efficiency are going to be retained and moved over. Okay, so this is how the copy-free transition works. Again, here we have got our existing 7-mode system, and before the transition, our clients are connecting there using their 7-mode system as normal. We then get our clustered ONTAP system ready and available for the migration. Then what we do is we disconnect the disk shelves from the 7-mode system and we connect them into the clustered ONTAP pair instead. So you can see when we do that, the data is still on the disk shelves, and we're just disconnecting it from 7 mode and then directly physically connecting it into the clustered ONTAP system. So we don't have to copy it and have a copy on both the 7 mode and also on the clustered system as well. So again, the unit of a copy-free transition is an HA pair, so it's an all or nothing thing. You must move all the disk shelves from the 7 mode HA pair to the target cluster nodes. Copy-free transition requires a disruption to data access. Obviously, you're unplugging the cables and then moving it from the 7 mode to the clustered ONTAP system. So while it's uncabled, obviously your clients cannot access their data. But you can make this a pretty short outage. The migration cost is reduced by enabling the reuse of disk shelves. So you saw when we did the copy-based transition, we had to have disk shelves on our 7 mode system, and also we needed to have separate disk shelves on our clustered ONTAP system as well. And for the migration, we had a copy of the data on both systems. Well, when we use the copy-free transition, we don't need to have 2 sets of disk shelves. We just have that 1 set of disk shelves with the original data on there, and we just move it from the 7 mode to the clustered ONTAP system. The overall transition is faster because we're just recabling rather than having to copy all the data to the new system. So that's all good stuff. So if you're thinking, well, definitely I'm going to be using copy-free transition, there are a few caveats with it, like it's not supported on all controller models, it's not supported on the entry-level systems right now. So here are the operations when we use the copy-free transition. We start off with the planning and pre-checks, which is pretty much the same as when we did the copy-based transition. We then apply the SVM configuration on our clustered ONTAP system. We test that that is working okay, and we verify the cutover readiness. Again, the 7 mode transition tool wizard is going to walk you through these steps. You then disconnect the clients from the 7 mode system, export and halt the 7 mode systems, cable the disk shelves to the clustered ONTAP system and verify that the cabling is all set up okay. Again, there's a tool in the 7 mode transition tool that will verify that for you. You then import the data and configuration using the 7 mode transition tool. So again, when it's on the 7 mode system, the metadata, the format of that is different than it needs to be for clustered ONTAP. So at this point, it's going to be converted to the cluster format by the 7 mode transition tool. Then you can do the pre-production verification, check that everything is okay, and finally reconnect the clients and commit the project. So that's the entire order of operations there. Again, whether you're using the copy-free or the copy-based transition, first thing you're going to do is run the collect and assessment and audit your existing systems. And here's a screenshot, again, as we work through the wizard, this time for the copy-free transition. So some things to tell you about the 7 mode transition tool. You can use volume move to relocate volumes as necessary within the ONTAP cluster after migration. So when you saw the copy-free transition there, you move the existing shelves from the 7 mode system to the clustered ONTAP system. So you might have thought, well, what if I want to upgrade my disk shelves? Or what if I want that data to be on different performance disks? Because maybe it's kind of old now, and you want it to be on lower performance disks on the clustered ONTAP system. That would be quite a reasonable thing to do, right? And you might be thinking, well, I can't do that if I do the copy-free transition because I'm moving the disk shelves from one system to the other. But remember, once you've moved it, it's on clustered ONTAP, and you can do volume moves throughout the system. So you can still do the copy-free migration. Once you've done that, if you do have those other disk shelves on the clustered ONTAP system, you can freely move the volumes about there. Also, you can install Clustered ONTAP on the 7 mode controllers and add them to the cluster. So after you've done the migration, you don't necessarily have to decommission your 7 mode system. If the controller models there are modern enough and you want to add them to the Clustered ONTAP system, what you can do is just basically format them and then reinstall Clustered ONTAP on there and then add those controllers to your cluster. So this is actually looking at doing something similar here. So if you're doing a 2-node migration, So this is where you have got a 7-mode high availability pair, and you want to just basically upgrade the operating system on there from 7 mode to cluster mode. So you don't want to buy any new hardware, you just want to upgrade the operating system. Well, if you want to do that, then you can engage NetApp Professional Services or a local partner to be loaned a 2-node cluster system for the duration of the migration. And let's have a look and see how that is going to work. So again, we start off with our 7-mode HA pair. Then we get our target cluster HA pair, which is just going to be used temporarily to do the migration. What we want to do is upgrade 7-mode on our original system to cluster mode. So we just get a loan of this cluster mode system here. Then we do the copy-based transition and we migrate the data from the 7-mode system to the cluster system. Then we don't have any data required on the 7-mode system now because it's all on this cluster mode system now. Then what we can do is we can format the 7-mode system and we can install Clustered ONTAP on there instead, and we can then add those nodes to the existing ONTAP cluster. The next thing that we do is we do a volume move to move the data from the disks that are owned by the original Clustered ONTAP system back onto what was originally the 7-mode system, but is now part of our ONTAP cluster. Then, when we've done that, we can then remove the system that was originally the clustered system. We're now back to our original 7-mode hardware only, but we're now running clustered data ONTAP on there. Okay, next thing to cover is the planning and the environment discovery. And this is actually the very first stage in the migration process. So you might be wondering, well, why am I covering the first thing actually near the end of the lecture? Well, the reason is that this is going to help you figure out which tool or tools you should use. So should you be using the 7-mode transition tool or a host-based or application-based migration option? So I am covering it near the end because I needed you to understand about the different tools before we can go a bit deeper into the considerations for which one you should use. But it's actually the environment discovery which is going to give you the information that's going to help you to decide now that you know what the different options are. So what environment discovery does is it's where you identify the existing 7-mode systems, the workloads, the applications, and the constituent groups, and the business and cutover requirements of each. So this is not using the 7-mode transition tool assessment tool. This is even before that. Obviously, you need to know what 7-mode systems and what hosts and applications you have before you can tell the assessment tool in 7-mode TT about which systems you want to audit. So you need to have your own knowledge and your own documentation of this. So gather together all the information about the 7-mode systems that you have that you need to migrate over to cluster mode, which hosts are using them, which workloads and applications are running on there. Also, the business and the cutover requirements for each. For example, for a particular workload, can it handle an outage or not? Does it have to be non-disruptive, or is disruptive okay? Because if it's okay to have a short outage, then it might be easier to just use the copy-free transition with the 7-mode transition tool rather than having the extra complexity of an application level migration. So gather all that information together. Also verify about other software such as host utilities on your clients. Is the version that is currently in use for the 7-mode system also going to be compatible with the clustered ONTAP that you're migrating to? Also, if you're using any management scripts as well, the command line syntax in 7-mode is different than it is in cluster mode. So you're going to need to change those scripts to be supported in the new system. Also, figure out what your backup and disaster recovery configuration is on your existing 7-mode systems, because you're going to need to have a backup and disaster recovery configuration that works the same way once you've moved over to Clustered ONTAP. So NetApp do have a decision tree that can help you to choose which of the options you're going to use for your migration. So at the start, first off, are you migrating a virtualized workload? Like, is it running in VMware vSphere or Hyper-V or another hypervisor? If it is, then it's recommended that you use the tools that are available with that hypervisor. For example, Storage vMotion, if you're using VMware. If you're using another hypervisor, use that hypervisor's version of Storage vMotion to move the data from the 7-mode system to the Clustered ONTAP system. Next thing is application-based DR available. And what NetApp mean here is that application capable of managing its data in 2 different locations at the same time, like the 7-mode system and the Clustered ONTAP system. So if the application is capable of doing the migration itself, then typically you want to use those application-based tools to move the data over. The next thing to check is, okay, is it SAN or NAS? And are we migrating from NetApp 7 mode, or are we migrating from another vendor's storage here? If we're migrating from another vendor's storage, we can't use the 7 mode transition tool because there's a clue in its name. It only works for 7 mode migrations. So I'll talk a bit more about if we're migrating from another vendor on the next slide. If it is NetApp NAS, but if there's some exceptions there that preclude us from using the 7 mode transition tool, again, we will have to use one of the other NAS or SAN migration options. But if we are migrating from 7 mode, it's not a virtualized workload, and we don't have application-based migration available to us, then we're going to be using the 7 mode transition tool, and we can either use the copy-based or the copy-free transition, whichever one is going to work better in our particular environment. So for those 2 options we had there about if we're migrating another vendor storage, either SAN or NAS, obviously we cannot use the 7 mode transition tool. It only works for 7 mode. Other hardware appliance or software-based tools, such as Cirrus, for example, are available if migrating from another vendor's SAN or NAS storage. That particular vendor also may have their own tools that are suitable for doing the migration too. So if you are migrating from another vendor's storage, obviously on a case-by-case basis, research the options that are available to you for that particular use case and go with the best one for your environment. Okay, last thing that I want to talk about is Qtree Considerations. Between 7 mode and Clustered ONTAP, there is feature parity in cluster mode for everything that 7 mode can do. Actually, because cluster mode is more modern and newer with the latest developments in 7 mode, cluster mode can actually do more than 7 mode can. So for all of your different configuration and settings on 7 mode, when you migrate the system over to cluster mode, everything there is going to be supported. With this pretty much one fairly major exception here. Well, it can be major for you if you are doing Qtree level SnapMirror replications. Because SnapMirror in 7 mode can replicate at either the Qtree or the volume level. So when you're setting up SnapMirror in 7 mode, you can specify a Qtree that you want to replicate between 2 systems. You can also replicate volumes as well. But in Clustered ONTAP, it's different. It does not support Qtree level replication. It's volume level only in Clustered ONTAP. So this can cause an issue if you're migrating 7 mode systems which have got SnapMirror relationships where they're replicating at the Qtree level, because that is not going to work the same way when you migrate to Clustered ONTAP. So you're going to need a plan there. You're going to need to figure out how you're going to do the migration so that your SnapMirror replication is still going to work. Now, there's 3 options for how Qtrees will be migrated. And the first one here is if you're not doing Qtree level replication. So the first one is you can just do Qtree to Qtree migration. That's a one-to-one relationship. So if you've got 10 Qtrees in your 7 mode system, you're going to have the exact same 10 Qtrees in your Clustered ONTAP system. The next option is to do Qtree to volume migration. This is a one-to-one relationship again, but it's not from a Qtree to a Qtree, it's from a Qtree to a volume. So if you've got 10 Qtrees on the 7-mode system, you're going to have 10 volumes on the clustered ONTAP system that match up with those Qtrees. And the last option you've got is Qtree Consolidation. This is where there's multiple Qtrees being mapped to single volumes. So for example, let's say that you have got 20 Qtrees on the 7-mode system. In that case, you could map the first 10 Qtrees to a volume on Clustered ONTAP, and then the next 10 Qtrees to another volume on the Clustered ONTAP system. So you'd be going, in that example, from 20 Qtrees to 2 volumes. Obviously, you would have the Qtrees with the same replication settings being mapped to the same volume. So if you had 10 Qtrees with particular replication and possibly security settings, and then another 10 Qtrees which have also got the same replication security settings but different from those first 10 Qtrees, you would map them to 2 different volumes. Okay, so those considerations. So if Qtrees are being used on the 7-mode system for quotas only, not being used for replication, then that's fine. There's not going to be any issue at all. You can use that one-to-one Qtree to Qtree migration. But if Qtrees aren't being used for SnapMirror replication and there are up to several hundred Qtrees, then use Qtree to volume migration, a one-to-one relationship. If Qtrees are being used for SnapMirror replication and there are many hundreds or even thousands of Qtrees, then you don't want to do a one-to-one mapping, create a volume for every single one of those Qtrees. In that case, use Qtree consolidation. And obviously, the Qtrees that you're going to be consolidating, pick the Qtrees that have got the same replication and security requirements and map them to the same volume. Where you've got Qtrees that have got different replication and or security requirements, then they're going to need to be mapped to a different volume. And ensure your security settings are maintained if Qtrees are being exported. So you can do exports at both the volume and the Qtree level. If all your exports are at the volume level, then that's not a problem. But if you are doing exports at the Qtree level and you've got different settings on those different Qtrees, then you can't map them to the same volume. They're going to have to be mapped to different volumes. With those 2 later options, which was the Qtree to volume migration and the Qtree consolidation, where you're moving from a Qtree to volume, the way it works is you do the work on the 7-mode system. So on the 7-mode system, you're going to move the data from a Qtree to a volume, and then you're going to migrate volume to volume when you're doing the migration from 7-mode to Clustered ONTAP. Thanks for watching. If you want to get hands-on practice with NetApp storage for free on your laptop, then you can download my free ebook, which you can see above my head right now. Also, check out my NetApp Storage Complete course, which will teach you everything you could possibly want to know about ONTAP. Thanks.